The land was all Luke Travers had left. It was a hard land, high desert stretching out in every direction under a white-hot Arizona sky. It was a place of red sandstone cliffs that bled color when the sun set, and vast plains of greasewood and bitterbrush that ripped at a man's trousers. It was a place of rattlesnakes and dust storms, where the wind never seemed to stop its low, mournful complaint. Luke rode his buckskin gelding, Silas, along the southern fence line. The horse knew the route as well as he did. Luke's eyes scanned the horizon, a habit learned from years of solitude and a war that had taught him to look for things that were out of place. He was a quiet man, made quieter by loss. His wife, Mary, had been taken by the smallpox 5 years back. His brother, Jesse, had been taken by a Comanche raid 10 years before that. Now, there was just the ranch, a small log cabin miles from anyone, and the cattle that were too thin to fetch a good price. The nearby town of Saguaro Creek had little use for him. He was scarred from his time as an Army scout, and those scars, paired with his silence, made folks uneasy. They either looked through him or looked at his land with greedy eyes. He preferred the company of the hawks circling overhead. He was thinking of the break in the barbed wire up ahead, a chore he'd put off for 2 days. When he heard it, it was a thin sound, almost lost in the wind, a weak cry. He pulled Silas to a halt, tilting his head. It was not a calf. It was too high-pitched, maybe a coyote pup, or a lamb caught in a thicket. He dismounted, his rifle in his hand, and walked toward a jumble of sandstone boulders that offered the only real shade for a mile. The sound came again, more a gasp than a cry. He moved around a large, flat rock and stopped. It was not an animal. Curled in a deep crevice, hidden from the sun, was a person, a woman. She was Apache. Her dark, matted hair was plastered to her face with sweat. She was wearing a simple cotton skirt and blouse, both filthy and torn. She was curled on her side, her body trembling in small, violent shudders. One hand was clutched tight under her skirt, high on her leg, gripping a piece of cloth. Luke's first instinct was caution. An Apache woman alone meant others were nearby. He scanned the ridges again. Nothing. No horses, no smoke, no dust. Just the wind and the heat. He knelt, his rifle still ready. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. She did not respond. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and fast. He moved closer, close enough to feel the heat coming off her skin. She was burning with fever. He saw the makeshift cloth she was clutching, saw the dark, wet stain on it. He looked at the ground around her, searching, and he saw it. Coiled in the dust not 5 feet from her hiding place was a diamondback, its rattle broken, its head crushed by a rock. She had killed it, but not before it had struck. He knew. The delirium, the fever, the location of her clutched hand. She had been bitten, and by the look of her, it had been hours ago. He was the only one who could help her, and he was miles from anyone else. "Ma'am, I need to see the wound," he said, louder this time. He touched her shoulder. Her eyes snapped open. They were black, wild with fever and terror. She tried to scramble back, but she was too weak. A word, a name, hissed from her cracked lips. "No," she breathed, her hand weakly pushing at his chest. She was conscious, but barely. "You've been bit," Luke said, his voice firm but low. "A rattler. I have to get the poison out, or you'll die. You understand me? You will die." She moaned, her head thrashing from side to side. Her hand was still clamped tight under her skirt, a barrier of modesty that was about to kill her. Luke felt a cold knot in his stomach. He knew what this meant. He was a white man. She was Apache. The rules of this land were as clear and as deadly as the snake. To touch her in this way was a violation that war and hatred had carved into stone. He remembered Mary, her hand in his, her breath rattling in her chest. He had failed to save her. He would not fail again. "I'm sorry for this," he said, and he meant it. He pinned her flailing arms with one hand, his weight holding her down. She cried out, a thin, weak sound. With his other hand, he grabbed the hem of her rough skirt and lifted it. She was too lost in the poison, too consumed by the pain, to fight him. He saw the wound. It was high on her inner thigh, high enough that the cloth she had pressed against it was soaked. The flesh was swollen, distorted, and stained a sickening purple-black. The 2 fang marks were dark punctures in the center of the swelling. The poison was moving fast, racing toward her heart. He had no time. He let go of her, moving with a desperate, focused energy. He gathered dry brush, striking a match to it. The flames caught, licking at the dry wood. He pulled his skinning knife from the sheath on his belt. He held the blade in the fire, watching it glow orange, sterilizing it. He ripped open his saddlebag, pulling out his tobacco pouch and a small flask of whiskey. He turned back to her. She was watching him, her eyes wide with uncomprehending terror. "This will hurt," he said. He did not wait. He pressed the hot blade to her skin, making 2 deep X-cuts over the fang marks. She screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, primal shriek of agony that echoed off the rocks and was stolen by the wind. The sound ripped through Luke, but he did not hesitate. He bent his head, put his mouth over the bleeding cuts, and sucked. The taste was vile, metallic and bitter. He spat the poisoned blood onto the dust. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve and did it again. He could feel her skin burning against his lips. He repeated the motion, again and again, until the blood ran cleaner, until his own mouth was numb. When he finally pulled back, he was breathing hard. He took a swig of the whiskey, swished it, and spat it out. He poured the rest of it directly onto the open wound. She screamed again, arching off the ground, before her body went rigid and then fell limp. She had passed out. He was grateful for it. He took a plug of tobacco, chewed it into a wet poultice, and packed it into the cuts to draw out any remaining venom. He looked at his own shirt. It was all he had. He ripped a long strip from the bottom of it, then another. He wrapped the strips tightly around her leg, binding the wound. He stood up, his body aching. He looked down at the woman. She was pale as ash under her sun-darkened skin. He could not leave her here. The sun, the coyotes, the fever. They would finish what the snake had started. He bent down and carefully straightened her skirt, pulling it down over her legs. It felt like a small, necessary apology. He lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of rags and fevered bones. He carried her to Silas, mounted, and settled her in front of him, her head lolling against his chest. He turned the horse toward home, the long mile stretching out before him. He carried her into the small, one-room cabin and laid her on his own cot. The cabin was sparse, containing only the cot, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs. For the next 3 days, Luke did not sleep for more than an hour at a time. He was a man haunted, caught in a waking nightmare. The woman, Nalin, though he did not know her name, thrashed in the grip of the fever. He sat by her side, wiping her face and arms with a cool, wet rag. He boiled willow bark into a bitter tea, forcing sips of it between her cracked lips when she was lucid enough to swallow. He changed the bandages, cleaning the angry, festering wound with whiskey and salt water. It was a grim, thankless task, and all the while, he saw Mary. He saw his wife's face superimposed on the stranger's. He saw her lying in this same cot, her skin just as hot, her breath just as shallow. He remembered the feeling of utter helplessness as the smallpox ravaged her body. A foe he could not fight, could not shoot, could not even see. The townspeople had refused to help, afraid of the sickness, just as they had refused to help when she had been alive, whispering that she was too friendly with the local tribes, that she traded with them too freely. He had been alone then, and he was alone now. The same desperate prayers, the same frantic bargaining with a silent God. He had failed Mary. Her hand had grown cold in his. He found himself murmuring to the unconscious woman, "Not this time. I will not let you go. Not this time." It became a vow. On the 2nd day, while he was cooling her arms with the wet cloth, he saw the scars. They were not from the desert, not from rock or thorn. On her back and shoulders, visible where her blouse had torn, was a lattice of old marks, white and silver against her skin. They were the unmistakable pattern of a whip. On her forearm, just above the wrist, was a round, puckered burn, old and long-healed. Luke stopped, the rag dripping in his hand. This woman had not just been running from a snake, she had been running from something far worse. A cold, hard anger settled in his gut. She was not just a victim of circumstance, she was a victim of cruelty, of men. It stripped away any lingering doubt he had about bringing her here. He would see her well, or he would die trying. The fever broke on the third morning. It did not fade gently. It shattered. Luke had finally fallen into a dead sleep, slumped in the chair by the cot, his head on his chest. A sharp gasp of air, a sudden movement, jolted him awake. He opened his eyes. She was sitting up. She was staring at him. Her eyes were no longer clouded with fever. They were clear, sharp, and filled with a terrifying, lucid panic. Before he could speak, before he could even raise a hand, she moved. She was fast, faster than he could have believed. She scrambled off the cot, ignoring the pain in her leg, and dove for the table. She grabbed the skinning knife he had carelessly left there. She backed away from him until she hit the far wall of the cabin, her shoulders pressed against the logs. She held the knife out. The blade pointed at his chest. Her hand was shaking, but her grip was sure. She was a cornered animal, ready to fight, ready to die. Luke Travers did not move a muscle. He did not reach for the pistol on his hip. He did not even stand. He slowly raised his hands, palms open and empty, showing he was no threat. He kept his voice low and steady, the same voice he used on a spooked stallion. "I already saved your life." He let the words hang in the small space between them. Her eyes darted from his face to the door, then back. She was calculating. He nodded toward her leg, where the strips of his shirt were wrapped tightly around her thigh. "The snake," he said simply. "It near killed you. You've been in this cabin for 3 days." She glanced down, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, as if she were just now realizing the dull, throbbing pain. Her gaze snapped back to his, still wary, still full of suspicion. He waited another long, silent moment. The only sound was her ragged breathing and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "You want to kill me now?" Luke said, his voice flat. "I won't stop you." He sat there, perfectly still, offering her his life in exchange for the one he had saved. It was the only coin he had that she might understand. She stood frozen against the wall, the knife wavering. He could see the war in her eyes, the ingrained terror of a white man, of any man, warring with the undeniable truth that she was alive, that her leg was bound, that he was sitting in a chair with his hands up while she held a blade on him. A long minute passed, then another, slowly, so slowly he almost could not see it. The knife point lowered. She did not drop it. She did not put it down, but she lowered it to her side. She slid down the log wall until she was sitting on the floor, pulling her knees up to her chest, a protective ball of misery and fear. The knife rested on her lap, her hand still gripping the handle. She watched him. Her black eyes never left his face. Luke let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He slowly, deliberately, stood up, went to the fireplace, and stirred the coals. He added a piece of wood, his back to her, a gesture of trust he did not entirely feel. He scooped some coffee grounds into the pot and set it on the grate. He did not speak again, and neither did she. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the empty silence of loneliness. It was a heavy, breathing silence, filled with questions, fear, and the unspoken weight of what had passed between them. The days that followed settled into a thick, strained silence. Naylin, as Luke would eventually learn her name was, did not move from her corner. She had appropriated the chair from the table, wedging it between the log wall and the cold stone of the fireplace, creating a small, defensible space. The skinning knife never left her hand. It rested on her lap when she sat, and was clutched in her fist when she slept, upright, in the chair. Luke gave her the space she demanded. He moved the cot to the opposite wall, near the door, and slept there himself. He was used to the floor, but he wanted her to have the small comfort of the mattress, even if she refused it. He would rise before the sun, careful to make no sudden movements. He would build up the fire, put the coffee on, and slice off a piece of bacon. He would cook a simple breakfast, plate it, and set the plate on the floor, halfway between them, as if feeding a wild, untrusting animal. He would do the same with a cup of water. Then he would take his rifle, his hat, and leave for the day. His work was a mercy. It was real, it was hard, and it was blessedly silent. He mended the fences the wind had knocked down. He tracked a mountain lion that had been worrying his small herd, firing a warning shot to send it back up into the high cliffs. He spent hours in the saddle, checking on his cattle, which were scattered across 10,000 acres of unforgiving brush. He found 2 dead, one from thirst, the other from a coyote pack. He shot the coyotes, his face grim. The land demanded constant payment, a toll of blood and sweat. But his mind was never fully on the work. It was back in the cabin. He found himself riding home an hour earlier than usual each day, a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He would push open the heavy cabin door, half expecting to find her gone, or worse. But she was always there, always in the chair. The plate would be empty, the cup dry, the only sign of her movement. And her eyes, her dark, watchful eyes would snap to him the moment he entered, tracking him as he cleaned his rifle, as he prepared a meager supper of beans and cornbread, as he set her plate down in the same spot. She was healing. The fever was long gone. He could see the strength returning to her, the way she sat straighter, the way her grip on the knife was no longer the desperate clutch of a fever victim, but the steady, ready hold of a survivor. She was a shadow in the corner of his life, a silent, wounded presence that filled the small cabin more completely than any shouted word. He changed her bandage only once more. He had left a fresh strip of cloth and a small bowl of salt water on the table while he was out. When he returned, the bowl was used, and he could see a clean white edge of the new bandage peeking out from under her skirt. She would tend to herself. The thought gave him a strange pang of relief, followed by an equally strange pang of something else, disappointment. He pushed it away. It was better this way. The 3rd week after he brought her back, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The air grew heavy, still, and charged, the way it only did before a summer monsoon. The wind, usually a constant companion, died completely, leaving an oppressive, suffocating silence. Luke brought Silas into the lean-to stable, giving him extra feed and checking the integrity of the roof. He secured the door to the chicken coop and brought in an extra load of firewood, stacking it high by the hearth. Naylin watched him, her eyes wide, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The storm hit just after sundown. It did not arrive gently. It was as if the sky cracked open. A brilliant flash of lightning lit the cabin in a stark, blue-white glare, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the very logs of the walls. Naylin jumped, the knife flashing in her hand as she pressed herself deeper into her corner. Then the rain came. It was not rain. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that hammered the landscape. It sounded like 1,000 horses galloping on the cabin's sod roof. For an hour, they sat in the dim, flickering light of the fire, the roar of the storm isolating them completely from the outside world. The cabin was old, built by Luke's father 20 years prior. It was strong, but it was not perfect. It started with a drip. A single drop of muddy water splashed onto the table. Then another, then a third, landing on the floor near Naylin's feet. She looked up, her gaze following the dark stain spreading on the ceiling planks. Within minutes, the single drip became a steady, miserable trickle. It ran down the wall and began to puddle around her chair. She stood, backing away, her blanket clutched in her hand. Luke swore under his breath. The leak was in a bad spot, right where the main roof beam met the wall. He grabbed a bucket and slid it under the worst of it. It began to fill with a steady plink, plink, plink. "Damn it," he muttered. Looking up, the water was finding new paths. Another leak sprang, this one directly over his cot. He threw his bedroll onto the floor. "Gotta patch it," he said, more to himself than to her. He dragged the heavy table under the leak, climbed on top of it, and pushed at the ceiling planks. They were soaked. He grabbed a handful of old rags he kept for cleaning his rifle and began stuffing them into the gap. Trying to staunch the flow, it was useless. The water just soaked the rags and streamed down his arm. He was filthy, dripping with muddy water, and frustrated. He needed something more. He looked down. Naylin was standing by the fire, watching him, her face pale in the flashing lightning. He pointed at the wall, at a burlap sack of grain. "The sack," he said, his voice loud over the storm. "I need the sack." She stared at him, uncomprehending. He pointed again, more forcefully. "The burlap!" She looked at the sack, then at him. She hesitated, her body taut with distrust, but the water was now streaming onto her bedding, which she had thrown on the floor. With a sudden, jerky movement, she ran to the sack, ripped the twine tie from its top, and dumped the grain onto the floor. The dry kernels scattered across the planks. She threw the heavy burlap sack at him. He caught it, grunting. It was exactly what he needed. He folded it, creating a thick pad, and jammed it hard into the leaking crevice, using his knife to wedge it in deeper. The flow slowed, then reduced to a manageable drip. He sighed, climbing down. He was soaked to the skin. He looked at her. She was soaked too, her hair plastered to her face, her thin blouse clinging to her. She was shivering. He grabbed his own blanket from the floor and tossed it to her. "Get dry," he said. She caught it, surprised. She looked at the blanket, then at him. She did not wrap herself in it, but she held it. They stood there, two survivors on a small, leaking island. The world roaring and crashing down outside. The fire hissed as stray drops hit the coals. They did not speak for a long time. Luke sat on his cot, his back against the wall, listening to the thunder and the steady drip of water into the bucket. Naylin had returned to her chair, but she did not sit. She stood, wrapped in her own blanket, watching the fire. The tension that had defined their silence for weeks was still there, but the storm had changed it, charged it with something new. They had worked together. A small, desperate act, but it was a bridge. It was Naylin who broke the silence. Her voice was so low he almost missed it. A whisper beneath the howl of the wind. "Why did you touch me there?" Luke froze. The question hit him harder than the thunder. He looked at her. She had not turned. She was still staring into the flames, her profile rigid. He knew exactly what she meant. The snake bite. His hands on her, his mouth. He felt a flush of heat rise up his neck, a shame he could not name. His own voice, when it came, was hoarse, shaking slightly. "Because if I didn't, you'd be dead." He stared at his hands, remembering the feel of her burning skin. The poison was high. It was the only way. He swallowed, the truth raw in his throat. "I'd do it again to keep you alive." She was quiet for another long minute. The bucket dripped. The fire crackled. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. It was not a question. It was a statement, flat and dead, devoid of all emotion. "No white man has ever touched me, there or anywhere, without violence." Without taking something. She turned her head, and her eyes found his in the gloom. They were dark pools, holding a history of pain he could barely imagine. "What is the price? What do you take from me?" Luke stared at her, genuinely confused. "Price? I have no money. I have nothing. What is the price you ask for the food? For my life?" She was asking as one would ask the price of flour or bullets. It was a transaction she understood. Luke felt a sudden, cold fury, not at her, but at the world that had taught her this. He stood up, and she flinched, her hand tightening on the knife she still held, hidden in the folds of her blanket. He stopped, holding his hands up, just as he had that first day. "There is no price," he said, his voice shaking with an emotion she could not place. I am not like them. I don't want anything from you. I couldn't let you die out there." She searched his face, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. This was a trick, a lie. His refusal was more frightening than a demand would have been. Cruelty was a language she spoke, this gentle denial, this lack of advantage-taking. It was a foreign tongue. It made no sense. She watched him, wary, confused, and for the first time, a small, secret seed of curiosity was planted in the barren soil of her fear. She turned back to the fire, her mind racing. She remembered. The memory came on her as she watched the flames, as sharp and as sudden as the snake's fangs. She remembered the traitor, a fat man with a greasy beard and small, cruel eyes named Jedediah Stowe. He had come to the reservation, a place of dust and starvation. Waving papers, he had spoken with the agent, a thin, sour man who hated his job and everyone in it. She had seen the coins pass between them. She had been purchased. A servant, the agent said. A slave. Her heart knew. Stowe had tied her to his wagon. He had two other women, one Kiowa, one Paiute, both with the same dead eyes she felt in her own head. That night, he had collected on his purchase. She had fought, and he had used his whip, the one that left the scars Luke had seen. The next day, while he was inside the trading post in Saguaro Creek, bragging of his new wares, she had found a knife, the very knife she now held. She had sawn through the ropes and she had run. She had run for days. She did not know where she was going, only that she was running away from Stowe, away from the reservation, away from the endless, casual cruelty of men. She ran until her feet were bloody stumps, until her lungs burned, until the high desert sun had baked all thought from her head. She had collapsed under that rocky ledge, seeking only a moment's shade before she died. And then the snake had struck. The pain had been a strange, distant thing, just one more layer of agony on a life built of it. She had killed it, a final act of defiance, and had waited to die, until this man, this quiet, scarred man, who asked for nothing. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and cold. The days that followed were different. The silence was still present, but it was no longer a weapon. It was just quiet. Naylin left her corner. She took her bedding and moved it to the cot Luke had abandoned, accepting his unspoken offer. She still kept the knife, but it was tucked into the waistband of her skirt, not held in her hand. One morning, Luke brought in a sack of dried corn. He set it on the table with a stone grinder. He was clumsy with it, his large hands spilling the kernels. He was about to begin the slow, tedious work when Naylin stepped forward. She did not speak. She simply pushed him aside gently and took the grinding stone. Her movements were sure, practiced. She began to grind the corn into meal, the rhythmic thud scrape of the stone a new, comforting sound in the cabin. It was the beginning. He would come in from his work to find the floor swept clean with a makeshift brush of greasewood. He would bring in a piece of broken tack, a bridle with a snapped rein, and set it on the table. He would turn to get his tools, and when he turned back, she would be holding the awl, ready for him. She began to venture outside, first just to the woodpile. Luke watched from the window as she swung the axe. She was strong, her motions economical and powerful. She split a week's worth of wood in a single afternoon. They fell into a wordless rhythm. They were two broken people, moving around each other in the small, enclosed space, finding a way to coexist. Their shared chores were a language. He fixed the leak in the roof, properly this time. She took the grain she had spilled and fed it to the chickens. An apology he understood. He brought her a pair of his old trousers and a shirt. They were ridiculously large, but they were warmer than her torn skirt. She accepted them, and the next day, he saw she had cut them down, resewing them with a skill that surprised him. Their bond grew in these quiet moments, in shared glances and simple tasks. One evening, he was cleaning his rifle by the fire, his hands working the oilcloth over the barrel. The firelight caught the scar on the back of his left hand, a puckered, ugly mark from a rope burn he'd gotten years ago. Breaking a wild horse. She was sitting on the hearth, mending the trousers she had made. She stopped, her needle poised. She looked at his hand for a long time. Then, with a hesitation that made his breath catch, she reached out, her fingers, small and rough, brushed over the scar. It was the lightest touch, barely there, but it sent a jolt through him. It was the first time she had touched him willingly. She did not look at his face. She kept her eyes on his hand. "You shake in your sleep," she said, her voice soft. Luke was stunned. He had not known. He dreamed. Yes. He dreamed of Mary, of the war, of his brother. He had not known the dreams made him shake. He looked at her, truly looked at her. She was watching him, not with fear, but with a simple, quiet observation. He realized, in that moment, that just as he had been watching her, she had been watching him. She had seen his weakness, his hidden pain, just as he had seen hers. I dream," he said, his voice thick. She nodded, as if this explained everything. She pulled her hand back, her small task of mending suddenly absorbing all her attention. That night, the cold returned, a sharp, biting cold that promised an early autumn. The fire, no matter how high he banked it, could not seem to heat the corners of the cabin. Luke lay on his bedroll on the floor, shivering, his blanket pulled up to his chin. He could hear Nalin on the cot, twisting, trying to find warmth. After an hour, he heard her get up. He tensed, his hand moving toward the pistol he kept by his side. He saw her shadow move in the firelight. She picked up her blanket and the thin mattress from the cot. She walked to the hearth, to the warmest spot in the cabin, and laid them down. Not 5 feet from him. She lay down and pulled her blanket over her. They slept like that for 2 nights, 2 separate islands of cold. On the 3rd night, the cold was a physical thing, a presence in the room. Luke was shivering so hard his teeth chattered. He heard her shivering, too, a small, rhythmic tremor. He could not stand it. He sat up, and she sat up at the same time, as if they had shared the same thought. He looked at her. She looked at him. No words were spoken. He lay back down. He heard her move. She picked up her mattress and blanket and moved them the few feet that separated them. She laid her bedroll directly beside his, so close their blankets touched. She lay down, her back to him. For a long time they lay there, 2 rigid forms, separated by a tiny gap, yet more aware of each other than they had ever been. The cold was still unbearable. Luke let out a long, shuddering breath, slowly, deliberately. He turned on his side, his back to her. It was an invitation. He waited. He counted his own heartbeats, loud in his ears. 1, 10, 20. Then, as gently as a leaf falling, he felt her move. She turned, her small body pressing against his back. The simple, shared warmth was immediate, a shocking relief. He could feel her shivering begin to subside. He could feel the rhythm of her breathing. They lay there, back to back. 2 strangers sharing body heat to survive the night. There were no words. There was no touch beyond the press of their backs. But in the cold, dark cabin, with the wind howling outside, something unspoken, profound, and terrifying had changed. They were no longer just a man and a woman. They were 2 people, alone together. The shared warmth of their nights by the fire began to seep into the daylight. The rigid lines they had drawn around themselves started to blur. They began to talk, not in long conversations, but in short, practical bursts. He learned her name was Nalin. She learned his was Luke. He learned she was Apache, but from a band that had been broken and scattered years ago. She learned he had been a scout, but had left that life behind. They were like 2 maps, slowly revealing their landscapes to each other, one small landmark at a time. But the world outside the small, isolated ranch continued to turn, and it was a world that did not tolerate blurred lines. Luke had been putting off the trip for a week, but they were running low on essentials: flour, coffee, salt, and cartridges. He could not delay any longer. He rowed Silas into Saguaro Creek early one morning. The town was, as usual, a collection of dusty, false-fronted buildings huddled under the relentless sun. He tied Silas to the hitching rail in front of the general store, his eyes scanning the street. It was busier than usual. There were 3 wagons he did not recognize, and a small group of men, armed and rough-looking, were gathered outside the saloon, passing a bottle. He went inside the store. Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor, a thin man with a perpetually worried expression, nodded to him. "Travers, been a while?" "Abernathy," Luke replied, handing him the list. "Just the usual." As Abernathy gathered the flour and coffee, Luke moved toward the back of the store for his ammunition. That was when he heard the conversation. It came from the saloon, the bat-wing doors flapping open, the voices loud and coarse. "Heard he was through here last week," one man said. "A trader, name of Stowe, says he lost some property." "Property?" another voice chimed in. "That's what he called her, an Apache squaw. Said she was worth a good $200. Ran off on him near here." Luke's hand froze over the box of cartridges. His blood went cold. Stowe. The name Nayland had hissed in her fevered sleep. $200. The first man whistled. "He's offering $50 to any man who brings her back to him. $50, just for finding a runaway Indian. She's probably snake-bit and dead by now," a third man slurred. "This ain't forgiving country to be in on foot." "Maybe, maybe not. Stowe seemed to think she was tough. Said he'd be back in a month. The $50 stands. For one, I'm keeping my eyes peeled. $50 is a lot of money." Luke picked up the box of cartridges. He turned, his face a calm, unreadable mask. He walked back to the counter. Abernathy was weighing out the salt. Luke's mind was racing. Stowe, a trader. $50. It was a death sentence for Nayland. Every desperate, greedy man in the territory would be looking for her. "Need something else?" "Travers?" Abernathy asked, noticing his stare. "More bullets," Luke said, his voice even. 2 more boxes of the 45-70, and double the salt." Abernathy raised an eyebrow. "Expecting trouble, or just a hard winter?" "A little of both," Luke said flatly. He paid for his supplies, his movements deliberate. He loaded the heavy sacks onto Silas, his back to the saloon. He could feel the eyes of the men on him, the idle curiosity of bored, armed drunks. He untied his horse, swung into the saddle, and rode out of town. Never once looking back, he did not spur Silas into a run until he was 2 miles out, hidden by the first set of sandstone cliffs. He rode hard, the sacks of flour and salt bouncing heavily. The $50 figure echoed in his head. It was enough to make a man kill. It was enough to make a man betray his neighbor. He thought of his own isolation, the way the town looked at him. They already thought he was strange, an outsider. It would not take much for their suspicion to land on him. When he reached the cabin, Nayland was outside, mending the chicken coop door. She looked up as he rode in, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun. She had started wearing her hair in a single, practical braid, and the trousers and shirt he had given her, though patched and worn, looked right on her. She looked strong. She looked at home. A sharp pain lanced through him. He was putting her in terrible danger just by existing. He dismounted, his face grim. "We need to be more careful," he said, his voice tight. She saw the look in his eyes, the new tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" "I was in town. There are men. They are looking for you." He told her what he had heard. The trader, Stowe, the $50 reward. He watched her face as he spoke. He saw her flinch at the name Stowe, a quick, violent tremor. But as he spoke of the reward, her fear was replaced by a cold, hard anger he recognized. It was the same anger he'd seen in his own eyes after Mary died. "I am not his," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I am not property. I will not be taken." "No," Luke said. "You won't." He left the supplies on the porch and went to check his rifle. He cleaned it and loaded it, his motions precise. He had brought her back to life. and now he would have to defend that life. The next day, Luke was out moving his cattle to a higher pasture, a place with more grass and a spring that was harder to find. He was worried, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges. He was gone for most of the day. Nalin was alone in the cabin. The silence, which had once been her comfort, now felt thin, a poor defense. She knew Luke was worried, and it made her own fear sharpen. She tried to busy herself, grinding the last of the corn. When she was done, she looked for something, anything, to keep her hands occupied. She found herself standing in front of the large, rough-hewn wooden chest at the foot of Luke's cot. It was the one piece of furniture that was not purely practical. It was carved, dark wood, and he never opened it. She did not know why she did it. It was not curiosity, not really. It was a need to understand the man who had saved her, the man who was now risking himself for her. She lifted the heavy lid. The cabin filled with the scent of dried lavender and old wool. Inside, it was neat. There was a folded wool blanket, a small leather-bound Bible, and a tin-type photograph of a smiling young man who looked like Luke, his brother, she guessed. And under that, folded with impossible care, was a dress. Nalin lifted it out. It was simple, blue calico, worn at the elbows and the hem, but clean. It was the dress of a frontier wife, a working woman. It was small. The woman who had worn it had been slender. Nalin held it up against herself. It was Mary's dress. Luke had never spoken his wife's name, but Nalin knew. This was the woman who had died in the cot Nalin now slept in. This was the ghost that filled the empty spaces in the cabin, the sadness she saw in Luke's eyes when he looked at the fire. She stood there for a long time, the dress in her hands. She felt a complex, aching sadness, not jealousy, but a profound understanding. He had lost someone. He, too, was scarred, on the inside, where the marks didn't show. She felt the worn fabric, the simple stitching. This was the woman he had tried to save and failed. It was why he had fought so hard to save her. She carefully folded the dress, smoothing the wrinkles with her hand. She placed it back in the chest, along with the photograph and the Bible. She closed the lid. It made a soft, final sound. She knew, now, that she was not the only one in his past, and she knew that his past was the reason she had a future. When Luke returned at dusk, exhausted and on edge, he found Nalin sitting on the porch, his rifle across her lap. He tensed, pulling Silas to a halt. "What is it? Did you see someone?" "No," she said, her voice calm. "But I heard them. Coyotes. They were after the goat." She pointed, near the small pen where he kept 2 milk goats. The carcass of a large coyote lay in the dust. "You shot him?" Luke asked. Dismounting, he walked over. It was a clean shot, right through the shoulder and into the heart. A killing shot, made from at least 80 yards. "I used to hunt," she said simply, handing him the rifle. "For my people. Before. Luke looked at her, truly impressed. He had been a scout, and he knew a good shot when he saw one. She had not panicked. She had not been afraid. She had seen a threat and eliminated it. "That's a fine shot," he said, his voice holding a new respect. "You waste bullets," she replied, nodding at the coyote. "I could have trapped him, or used a bow. It is quieter." A small smile touched Luke's lips, the first in a long time. "Well, next time, you can teach me." And she did. In the days that followed, a new understanding began. The unspoken bond forged by shared chores deepened. He had a skill, and she had a skill. They began to trade. He took her to the small corral. Silas, his buckskin, was gentle, but the mare, Bess, was flighty, hard-mouthed, and distrustful. Luke had always broken his horses with a firm hand, the way the army had taught him. Nalin watched him fight the mare for 10 minutes, the horse pulling against the bit, tossing her head. Finally, Nalin stepped forward. "You fight her," she said. "She is a horse. She does not want to fight. She wants to understand." She took the reins from him. She did not use the bit. She looped the rein around the mare's nose, a simple hackamore. She spoke to the horse, a low, crooning sound in her own language. She did not pull or jerk. She applied pressure, steady and gentle. And the moment the mare turned her head, Nayland released the pressure, a reward. She stroked the mare's neck, her hands firm but kind. Within an hour, she had the mare following her around the corral like a pup. Luke watched, his arms crossed. He had been around horses his entire life and had never seen anything like it. Gentler hands, he murmured. In return, she took him into the scrub brush behind the cabin. You walk like a soldier, she told him, her face serious. Like a white man, all heel and boot. The earth cries out when you walk. She showed him how to walk on the balls of his feet, how to roll his foot to avoid snapping a twig. She showed him how to read the bend of a blade of grass, how to tell the difference between a deer track and a sheep track, not just by the shape, but by the depth. He was a good scout, but she was a hunter. She was part of the land in a way he had only ever been an observer of it. They became each other's teachers. He taught her how to use the sights on the rifle for a long shot. She taught him which plants to boil for a fever and which ones to chew for a snake bite, a lesson he wished he'd known weeks earlier. The trust between them was no longer fragile. It was a solid, living thing, built on shared respect. The nights by the fire were no longer cold. They lay back to back, the warmth between them a comfort, a simple fact. But the comfort was changing. Luke found himself acutely aware of her breathing, of the feel of her braid brushing his shoulder. He found himself looking at the curve of her neck as she ground the corn, or the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was focused. He was a man who had been alone for 5 years. He was a man, and she was a woman, and it terrified him. The fence line by the arroyo had been nagging at him. A flash flood 2 months prior had washed out 3 posts, and his temporary fix was not holding. He was fixing it one evening, the sun a hot, red ball on the horizon, painting the cliffs in shades of orange and purple. He was tired, his mind on the conversation he'd overheard in town, on the way Nayland had handled the mare. He was not paying attention. He was stretching the barbed wire, pulling it taut with his pliers. His boot braced against the new post. The wire was old, rusted. It snapped. The sudden release of tension threw him off balance. He stumbled backward, his boot catching on a loose rock. He fell, hard, his right side crashing against the very post he had just set. A white-hot, searing pain exploded in his chest. He could not breathe. He lay in the dust, gasping, the world spinning. He tasted dirt. He tried to push himself up, but a fresh wave of agony shot through his ribs, and he collapsed back, groaning. He was hurt, badly. He did not know how long he lay there. It could have been minutes or an hour. The sun was gone, the sky a deep, bruised purple. He heard her call his name. Luke? He tried to answer, but all that came out was a wheeze. He heard her running, her steps light and sure, the way she had taught him. She found him, a dark shape crumpled at the base of the fence post. Luke! Her voice was sharp with a new, raw emotion. Panic. She was beside him, her hands on his shoulders. Where are you hurt? My side. He managed to get out, the words laced with pain. Ribs. I fell. She did not hesitate. Her hands, which had been so gentle on the mare, were now strong and sure. She slid her arms under his back and shoulders. You must get up. You cannot stay here. The night is cold. With a strength that shocked him, she helped him to his feet. Every step was a fresh hell. He leaned on her, his arm slung over her shoulder, her small, solid body pressed against his good side, taking his weight. He could feel her heart hammering against his arm. It was a long, slow, agonizing walk back to the cabin. She got him inside and onto his cot, pushing him down gently. The fire was low, casting flickering shadows. He was sweating, his shirt soaked, but he was shivering. I need to see, she said. Her voice was no longer panicked. It was the calm, focused voice of the hunter. He tried to unbutton his shirt, but his fingers fumbled, and the movement sent a fresh jolt of pain through his side. He gritted his teeth, hissing. "Be still," she commanded. She took the front of his shirt in both her hands and, with one strong motion, ripped it open. The buttons scattered on the floor, clicking like small stones. It was the first time her hands were on his bare skin. He sucked in a breath, and it was not just from the pain. Her fingers, calloused and warm, probed his side. They moved over his ribs, gentle but firm, searching. He watched her. Her face, illuminated by the firelight, was a mask of intense concentration. Her brow was furrowed, her lips pressed together. "It is not broken," she said at last, her fingers pressing on a spot that made him jump. "Not all the way, but cracked, badly bruised." Her touch lingered. Her hand, which had been pressing and probing, stilled. It rested flat against his skin, just over his heart. He could feel the warmth of her palm, the slight roughness of her skin. It was no longer the touch of a healer. It was the touch of a woman. He looked into her eyes. She was looking at his chest, at the old white scar from the war, but her gaze was soft. He could feel the pulse of his own blood under her hand. She looked up, and her eyes met his. The cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the sound of their breathing, which suddenly seemed far too loud. Her touch had been a question. His stillness was an answer. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice thick. Her hand moved, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. Now I save you." Luke's hand came up, slowly, and covered hers. He did not pull it away. He just held it there, his skin against hers, her skin against his. He could feel the calluses on her palm, the strength in her small hand. He looked at her mouth, soft in the firelight. The air in the cabin was thick, charged, more powerful than the monsoon. He could feel the pull, the undeniable gravity of two lonely, broken people, finally in the same orbit. He leaned up, his uninjured arm pushing him off the cot. The pain in his ribs was a distant, dull ache, eclipsed by a sharper, more immediate need. She did not pull away. She leaned in. Her eyes fluttered closed. Their faces were inches apart. He could feel her breath on his lips, warm and sweet, smelling faintly of coffee. It was the moment, the brink, the small, quiet space where everything was about to change. And he broke. Luke turned his head away, his body shuddering. He pulled his hand from hers and fell back against the cot, a low groan escaping him. It was not from the pain in his ribs. It was from a deeper, more profound agony. Guilt, shame. He was staring at the wall, at the empty space where Mary's cot had been. It was a betrayal. He was alive, and she was dead. He was a man, and he wanted this woman, this Apache woman, this stranger he had rescued. He was ashamed of wanting, ashamed of being alive, ashamed of the hope that was flickering in his chest. Naylin was frozen for a moment, her hand still held in the air where his chest had been. She slowly pulled it back, her face unreadable. Then the hurt came, a visible shadow passing over her features, extinguishing the warmth that had been there moments before. She stood up, her body rigid, and pulled her blanket around her. She misunderstood. He could feel her misunderstanding, her hurt, radiate across the small room. She thought he was rejecting her. "Is it because I'm Apache?" she asked, her voice flat. But he could hear the tremor of pain beneath it. Luke squeezed his eyes shut. His ribs ached, but his heart ached more. He had hurt her, the one person in the world who understood his silence, and he had hurt her. He turned his head, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "No," he whispered, his voice raw. "God, no, it's not because of you." She waited, her arms crossed, a queen in a patched blanket, demanding the truth. "It's because," he said. The confession ripped from him. I'm afraid that if I touch you, I won't be able to stop. And I'm afraid you'll leave." He looked at her, his soul bared. "Everyone I've ever cared for leaves me. My brother, my wife, they die, or they leave. I'm afraid you'll leave, too." Nellen stared at him, the anger and hurt on her face softening into something else. Confusion. Understanding. She did not speak. She just watched him, this strong, quiet man, broken and trembling on his cot, admitting a fear that was as deep and as old as her own. She turned, walked to the fire, and added a log. The new flames licked at the wood, and in the growing light, she looked back at him, her decision made. Luke's confession hung in the small cabin, a fragile, trembling thing. He had admitted his fear, not of her, but of losing her. He had turned his shame inside out, revealing the raw, aching wound of his past. Nayland stared at him from across the room, her anger at his rejection eclipsed by a profound, startled recognition. She saw him, not as a white man, not as a savior, but as a man scarred by the same loneliness that had haunted her own life. She had no words for this. Her people did not speak of such things so openly, but she understood the language of loss. She gave him a short, sharp nod, an acknowledgement. Then she pulled her blanket tighter and returned to the cot, her back to him. But the space between them was no longer a chasm. It was simply a space. His ribs were a torment. For 3 days, he was mostly useless. He could feed the animals, but any lifting or hard riding was impossible. Nayland took over. She tended to his ribs, binding them tightly with strips of cloth, her touch firm and impersonal, a return to the role of healer. She split the wood. She took his rifle and hunted, returning with 2 rabbits, which she skinned and stewed with a skill that spoke of a lifetime of survival. Luke sat by the fire, mending tack, feeling weak, feeling humbled. He watched her move, her grace, her competence. The roles had reversed. He was the one being cared for. He was the one who was vulnerable. And in this vulnerability, a new, deeper trust was forged. On the 4th day, he was feeling strong enough to ride the fence line, albeit slowly. The air was clear, the sky a hard, metallic blue. He was saddling Silas, moving with the stiff, careful motions of an old man, when Nayland, who was washing a pot, suddenly froze. She lifted her head, her gaze fixed on the distant ridge to the east. "What?" Luke asked, his hand stilling on the cinch. "Horses," she said, her voice a low whisper. Luke strained his ears. He heard nothing but the wind in the greasewood. "I don't hear anything." "Many horses," she said, her eyes narrowing. "They are riding fast." He did not question her. Her senses were tuned to the land in a way his would never be. He moved, his pain forgotten, adrenaline surging. "The cave," he said, his voice sharp. He grabbed the rifle from its scabbard on his saddle. "Take this, and water." She was already moving, grabbing the rifle and the water skin. "They will look for tracks," she said, her voice tight. "The rock behind the cabin, it's all stone. There will be no tracks. Get in, and do not come out. No matter what you hear. Do you understand me? No matter what!" She nodded, her face a grim mask. She looked at the rifle, then at him. "You?" "I have the shotgun. They are townsfolk, not trackers. They'll be loud and clumsy. Go, now!" She slipped out the back, moving like a shadow. Luke watched her disappear into a narrow fissure in the sandstone cliff that rose up behind the cabin, a crack hidden by a curtain of overgrown brush. He had found it years ago. It was dry, deep, and defensible. He turned, went inside, and grabbed his double-barreled shotgun from over the mantel. He loaded both barrels. He looked at his ripped shirt, the one she had torn, still lying on the chair. He put it on, wincing as he buttoned it. He needed to look the part of the ailing, solitary rancher. He walked onto the porch, the shotgun held loosely in his hand, and waited. She was right. 5 minutes later, he heard them. A chaotic jumble of hooves and loud voices. A posse. 6 men rode into his yard, pulling their horses to a dusty, stamping halt. He recognized them from town. Bart Blevins, a loudmouth who spent more time in the saloon than on his own failed ranch, seemed to be their leader. With him were the Clevenger brothers, 2 hired hands known for being mean drunks, and 3 other men whose faces he knew. all of them carrying the same air of boredom and cheap greed. "Travers," Blevins called out, not bothering to dismount. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "We're on a hunt." Luke leaned against the porch rail, letting his exhaustion and the pain in his ribs show. "That's so, Blevins? What you hunting? Jackrabbits?" Blevins' face darkened. "We're hunting something a sight more profitable. $50 profitable. We're looking for a runaway squaw, property of a trader named Stowe." Luke kept his face blank, his eyes half-lidded. "An Apache? Out here? Haven't seen an Apache on this land in 10 years. Not since the army cleared them out." He let a small, bitter note enter his voice. One of the Clevenger brothers, the younger one, shifted in his saddle. "We heard you was in town a few days back. Travers, heard you bought a lot of bullets. An extra salt. Like maybe you was planning on preservation, or fending off visitors." The suspicion hung in the air, thick and ugly. Luke could feel his heart hammering against his cracked ribs. He knew Nayland was only 50 yards away, hidden in the rock, rifle in hand. "I buy what I need. Clevenger," Luke said, his voice flat. "This is my land. I'll buy what I please. And I've been sick, haven't been in the mood for visitors." He let out a low, racking cough, a genuine one that sent a spike of pain through his side. He spat on the ground. "Now, if you're done trespassing, I'll thank you to leave." Blevins' eyes narrowed. He looked at the small, tight cabin, at the thin plume of smoke from the chimney. $50 says you might be lying. That's a lot of money to keep to yourself. I think we'll just have a look around. For our peace of mind." He swung down from his horse. The others followed, fanning out, their rifles in their hands. "Stay out of my house, Blevins," Luke said, his voice low, but he did not raise the shotgun. He was one man, and he was hurt. They were 6. "We ain't interested in your house, Travers," Blevins sneered. "Just the outbuildings, barn, coop, such." Luke stood still, his knuckles white on the shotgun. As they spread out, it was a terrible, agonizing few minutes. He heard them kick open the door to the lean-to barn, spooking Silas, who whinnied in protest. He heard them rummaging, overturning a sack of feed. "Nothing in here," one yelled. "Check the coop." Another man, the younger Clevenger, walked toward the back of the cabin. He was walking directly toward the cliff face, toward the hidden fissure. Luke's blood turned to ice. He could not shoot. If he shot one, the others would kill him and find her. He had to stop him. Luke pushed himself off the rail, stumbling slightly. He coughed again. A wetter, deeper sound this time. "There's nothing back there," he wheezed, taking a step toward Clevenger. Just rock and snakes." Clevenger paused. He looked at Luke, at his pale, sweating face, at the way he held his side. He looked at the dark, tangled brush growing against the cliff. It was a perfect hiding spot. He took a step closer. "I'm telling you," Luke said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Get away from there. That's where I'm sick. Man, I've been relieving myself back there. You don't want to go back there." Clevenger stopped. He looked at Luke's clammy skin, his trembling hands. Sickness was the great fear of the frontier. Smallpox, cholera, fever. It was a faster death than a bullet. The rancher looked half dead on his feet. The man's pride would be the only reason he'd admit to such a thing. Clevenger's face twisted in disgust. He backed away. "Ain't nothing back there but filth. Bart," he called out. "This place is a sty, and this old fool is half dead." Blevins, who had found nothing in the barn, spat again. He was frustrated. "Ah, hell, it's a waste of time. She's probably dead in a ditch. Just like I said, that $50 is a ghost." He swung himself back into his saddle. "You're a lucky man. We ain't in the mood to run you off. Travers, this is good land for a man who's half crazy and sick." The others mounted, laughing. "Enjoy your bullets, old man," Clevenger called. They rode out, as loud and as chaotic as they had arrived, leaving a cloud of dust and the stench of cheap whiskey. Luke stood, shaking, his shotgun feeling as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He did not move until the sound of their hooves had faded completely into the wind. He waited another 10 minutes, his ears straining, his eyes on the ridge. Nothing. They were gone. He walked to the back of the cabin, his legs unsteady. He let out a low whistle, a passable imitation of a canyon wren. He waited. A minute later, the brush rustled, and Nylin emerged. Her face was white. Her knuckles were white on the rifle. But she was not trembling with fear. She was trembling with a cold, white-hot rage. Luke leaned against the cabin wall, the pain in his ribs returning with a vengeance. "It's all right," he breathed. "They're gone." She strode past him, her head high. She slammed the butt of the rifle down into the hard-packed dirt of the yard. "No," she said, her voice a low, vicious snarl he had never heard before. "It is not all right." He was startled by her fury. He had expected tears, relief. Not this. She turned on him, her black eyes burning. "They hunt me," she hissed. "Like a coyote, like an animal. They walk onto your land and they hunt me. $50. She spat the words, as Blevins had spat his tobacco. "He paid money for me, and now they pay money for me. I am not property. I am not a squaw. I am not some animal they can hunt." She broke, but it was not a breakdown of fear. It was a breakdown of pure, undiluted rage, a lifetime of being treated as less than human, of being bought and sold and hunted, all compressed into one explosive moment. She kicked at the dirt, a choked, furious sound torn from her throat. She would not cry. She would only hate. Luke watched her, his own exhaustion falling away, replaced by a deep, aching understanding. He saw her, not as a victim, but as a warrior who had been denied an enemy to fight. "I know," he said, his voice rough. She stopped, her body still vibrating with anger. "You know nothing," she spat. "You are a white man. You are one of them." The words hit him, a physical blow. He had saved her, he had hidden her, and he was still in her eyes. One of them. The ones who had hunted her, the ones who had bought her. He pushed himself off the wall, the pain in his side a dull, constant throb. He said, his voice quiet. He walked past her, into the cabin, which suddenly felt too small. A trap. He went to the fire and stared into it. She followed him, standing in the doorway, the rifle still in her hand, her face a mask of mistrust. "I was a scout," Luke said, his back to her. "After the war, I enlisted. I was young. I was full of hate." He could feel her stillness, her listening. "My brother, Jesse, he was killed in a raid, Comanches, but it didn't matter. We hated all of them, Apaches, Comanches, Kiowas. They were just Indians. The enemy." He paused, the memory thick in his throat. "I thought it was simple, us and them, good and evil. I did things I'm not proud of. Nylin, I rode with men who believed the only good Indian was a dead one. I believed it too, for a time." He turned to look at her. Her face was stone. "I saw what we did. We burned villages. We didn't always check who was in them. It wasn't war. It was just killing. And one day, I saw it wasn't making the hate go away. It was just making more of it. I saw that the truth wasn't simple. It was all just broken. So I left. I came here. I thought I could forget. I thought I could build something clean." Nylin's grip on the rifle loosened. "My village was burned," she said, her voice flat. "By men like you. They killed my family. For land. For nothing." "I know," he said softly. "And I am sorry for it. But the town, the men who were just here, they are no better. They are just a different kind of killer." He pointed to the wooden chest at the foot of his cot, the one she had opened. "My wife, Mary, she died in this cabin, in that cot you sleep in." Nylin's eyes flickered to the chest, a silent admission that she had been inside. "It was smallpox," Luke went on, his voice hollow as he relived the worst days of his life. "She was sick, burning with it. I rode to town. I begged Dr. Evans for help. He wouldn't come. Why? Nayland whispered. Because she had been too friendly, Luke said, the words full of the old, cold rage he had just seen in her. She was kind. She would trade with the local tribes, the ones who were left, starving up in the hills. She gave them food from our garden. She gave them blankets. The town, Abernathy, Blevins, all of them. They shunned her for it. They said she was an Indian lover. When she got sick, they said she had brought it on herself, that it was God's judgment. They wouldn't sell me medicine. They wouldn't send the doctor. They left her to die. They left me to die with her. He looked at Nayland, his eyes raw with a pain that was a mirror of her own. They hate you because you are Apache. They hate me because I don't hate you. Because I wasn't hateful enough for them. Because Mary wasn't. He took a step closer. His own anger and grief finally laid bare. So, you see, we are just two people, broken by different sides of the same damn war. Them and us. The silence that fell was profound. It was the silence of two souls who had finally shown each other their deepest, ugliest scars. The anger was gone from Nayland's face, washed away by a wave of disbelief, of connection. She finally lowered the rifle, leaning it against the wall. They sat by the fire as the sun went down. They did not eat. They just sat, side by side on the floor, passing a cup of water back and forth. The confessions had drained them, leaving them exhausted, but no longer alone. The air was still, purified. Luke's side ached. He shifted, and a low groan escaped him. Nayland looked at him. The healer returned, but this time, it was different. She reached out, her hand tentative. She did not touch his ribs. She touched his face, her fingers gently brushing the sweat-damp hair from his forehead. It was a touch of infinite, simple kindness, a touch that asked for nothing. He did not pull away. His confession had burned away the last of his guilt. He was not betraying Mary. He was honoring her by being the man she had believed him to be. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. He covered her hand with his, feeling the calloused palm, the strength that had saved him. He turned his head, his lips brushing the inside of her wrist. He felt her pulse jump. He opened his eyes. She was watching him, her gaze soft, her lips slightly parted. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a raw, trembling longing. He leaned in. It was a slow, tentative movement. It was not a kiss of conquest. It was a kiss of shared breath, of scars, of two people who had seen too much death and were clinging to life. He hesitated, his lips an inch from hers. A final question. She was the one who closed the small distance. The kiss was not what he had expected. It was not fire. It was water. It was release. It was the taste of salt. And he did not know if it was from his sweat or her tears. It was gentle, hesitant, then deepened, as a lifetime of loneliness, of being hunted, of being shunned, poured out of both of them. It was a kiss of recognition. You are here. You are alive. You are like me. When they finally broke apart, they were breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. The air was thick with unspoken need. It was not a rescue. It was not a payment. It was two equals, two survivors, who had found something worth holding in a world that had taken everything else. He was in pain, his ribs a cage of fire. He was vulnerable. She saw this. She, who had been the victim, the one in peril, was now the one who was strong. She helped him, her hands gentle, as she led him to the bedroll by the fire. Their shared space. They made love. It was not the fast, frantic coupling of cheap novels. It was a slow, trembling discovery. It was passionate, but it was also full of tears. He touched the old, white whip marks on her back, his fingers tracing them not with pity, but with a reverent, angry understanding. She touched the puckered bullet scar on his shoulder, a relic from his time as a soldier, as one of them. And her touch was one of forgiveness. It was a clumsy, human, and desperate act. It was the affirmation of life. His hands shook as he held her face. Her hands trembled as she unbuttoned his shirt, the one she had ripped, the one he had worn to face the posse. They held each other, two broken, scarred people, finding a moment of perfect, profound solace in the heart of a hostile world. In the dying light of the fire, they were not a white man and an Apache woman. They were just Luke and Nayland, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they were not alone. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing, red-gold embers, casting a soft, warm light on the two figures lying on the bedroll. The cabin was silent, the storm of their passion and confession having finally passed, leaving a quiet, profound intimacy in its wake. Luke lay on his back, his cracked ribs aching with a dull, constant throb. But his arm was around Nayland, her head resting on his good shoulder. Her hair, unbound, smelled of wood smoke and the clean, sharp scent of the high desert. For a long time, they just breathed, listening to the small settling sounds of the house. He had bared his deepest wound, the loss of his wife and the town's betrayal. Now, in this safe, quiet space, she felt the last of her own defenses crumble. He traced the line of her shoulder, his fingers finding the edge of the old, silvered whip marks on her back. He had seen them before, but now he touched them with a new, reverent anger. "Stow," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The traitor. He did this." She did not flinch from his touch. She pressed closer into his side. "Yes, he was a cruel man. He bought me like a horse. But he was not the one who took my life." Luke was quiet, waiting. He sensed there was more, a deeper scar than the ones on her skin. "My name is Nayland," she said, her voice so soft he had to strain to hear it. "It means by the creek. My people were the Chiricahua. We lived south of here, near the high mountains. We were happy." She spoke the word as if it were a foreign language, a place she had visited once as a child. "Stow, he found me on the reservation, a place of dust and sickness. He did not take me from my people. They were already gone." Her voice was flat, a recitation of a story told so many times inside her own head that the edges had been worn smooth, but the pain beneath was still jagged and sharp. "When I was younger, the soldiers came, the blue coats. They came at dawn." She paused, and he could feel her body tense, her breath catching. "They said we had raided a settlement. It was not us. It was another band. It did not matter. They came all the same. They burned the village." Luke's hand, which had been stroking her arm, stilled. He felt the old, cold shame of his time as a scout. "I am so sorry. Nayland, I was one of them, once." "I know," she whispered. "You told me. You are not them, not now." She took a breath, steeling herself. "There was fire and screaming. The men, my husband, they tried to fight, but there were too many. I ran with the other women to the caves. I was holding her." "Her?" Luke asked gently. A sound, a small, choked sob, broke from Nayland's throat. She had not cried when the posse came. She had not cried when she spoke of Stow. She cried now. "My daughter," she whispered, the word tearing from her. "Her name was Ayanna, Eternal Bloom. She was only 3 summers old." She turned in his arms, her face buried in his chest. He held her, his heart breaking, the rough wool of his shirt soaking up her quiet, agonizing tears. "They found us," she continued, her voice muffled against him. "The women in the cave, a soldier. He grabbed her. He pulled her from my arms. I bit him. I fought. He hit me with his rifle. He hit me until I stopped." Her hand came up and touched a small, thin scar above her eyebrow, one he had mistaken for a mark from the desert. "When I woke up, they were all gone. The soldiers, the other women, and Ayanna. They took the children. They took all the children." Luke's arms tightened around her, his own eyes burning. He had no words. There were no words for this. He just held her, rocking her gently, as a lifetime of grief poured out of her. "I looked for her," she said, her voice ragged, after a long silence. "For years, I went to the reservations, I went to the missions, but I was just another Apache woman. They pushed me away. They told me she was dead, or that she was civilized now, in a white family, far away, that she was better off. I do not know if she lived. I do not know if my little girl is alive." She pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand, her old, fierce pride returning, ashamed of her tears. Luke held her face, his thumbs brushing the dampness from her cheeks. "We will find her," he said, his voice thick with a new, sudden purpose. "I promise you, Nayland, I will sell this ranch. I will sell everything. We will go to every mission, every agency. We will find her." He expected relief or even hope. Instead, he saw a stark, cold fear enter her eyes. She pulled away from him, shaking her head, the old, hunted look returning. "No," she said, her voice sharp. "No, Nolan, we have to try. She could be out there." "And what if she is?" Nolan said, her voice rising. "What will they see? They will see a runaway squaw who has been living with a white man. They will see the property of Jedediah Stowe. They will not see a mother. They will see an animal. They will hurt her to punish me." She stood up, pulling the blanket around her, pacing the small cabin. "You do not understand. As long as he is looking for me, as long as that $50 reward is on my head, I am a danger to her. If they know I am alive, if he knows, they will come again, and they will not stop. My daughter, Ayanna, she is safer if the world believes I am dead." Luke watched her, the terrible, twisted logic of her fear silencing him. She was right. He had offered to fix a wound that was still being inflicted. He could not find her daughter. Not yet. First, he had to kill the monster that was hunting her mother. The next few days were a strange dream. The tension that had defined their lives was gone, replaced by a quiet, deep partnership. But underneath it, a new dread was building. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, however small and broken. And they now had everything to lose. They worked together, their movements synchronized. He taught her to shoot the shotgun, how to load both barrels, how to handle the kick of it. She taught him how to set a deadfall trap, using a heavy log and a carefully balanced trigger. They were preparing, though they did not speak of it. Luke's ribs were healing, the sharp pain fading to a deep, constant ache. His strength was returning. The warning came a week after the posse's visit. Nayland was on the small rise behind the cabin, gathering dried brush, when she stopped, her body going perfectly still. Luke was splitting wood, the rhythm of the axe a comfort. He saw her freeze, and his hand tightened on the handle. He followed her gaze to the distant eastern ridge. He saw nothing. Then, a flicker, a glint of light. It was not a random flash. It was the sun hitting glass, a spyglass. "He is watching," Nayland said, her voice flat, as she walked back to the cabin. "Not running." Luke nodded, his face grim. "Stowe. He will not come with Blevins this time," she said. "Blevins and his men are drunks. They are cowards. Stowe is a businessman. He will come with men he pays." "A militia," Luke said, his voice hollow. He had hoped Stowe would give up, write her off as a loss. But the trader's pride had been wounded. It was no longer about the money. It was about possession. They did not panic. They prepared. They had less than a day. They brought the mare and Silas into the small, sturdy barn, along with 2 sacks of feed and 3 full canteens. Luke boarded up the cabin's 2 windows, leaving only small, narrow slots, just wide enough for a rifle barrel. He reinforced the door with a heavy table. Nayland, meanwhile, moved through the brush and rocks surrounding the cabin. Her movements quick and silent. She was not building a defense. She was building an alarm. She set snares that would snap and balanced piles of small stones that would fall at the slightest touch. They would hear them coming, long before they saw them. That night, they did not sleep by the fire. They slept in the barn, in the hayloft, where they had a clear view of the cabin and the yard. Luke tried to protest. "If they come, you take the mare and you ride south. You ride until she collapses. Do not stop." Naylin turned to him, her face lit by the thin crescent moon. She laid her hand on his chest. "When you found me, I was an animal, hiding in a hole, waiting to die. When the posse came, you hid me in a cave. I will not hide again. I am not a rabbit. Luke, I am a hunter. This is my home. I fight for my home. Beside you." Her resolve was harder than the sandstone cliffs. He looked at her, this small, fierce woman who had lost everything, and he nodded. "Beside me." They came just before dawn, in the gray, misty light that turns the world into shadows. Naylin heard them first, a single, sharp snap of a twig, followed by the soft clatter of stones. She touched Luke's arm. He was instantly awake. They looked out the hayloft door. There were at least 9 of them. They were not drunk. They moved quietly, fanning out, surrounding the cabin. Luke recognized Jedediah Stowe immediately. He was a large man, as she had described, with a greasy beard, sitting on a fine black horse, well back from the others. He was giving orders. "They think we are in the house," Luke whispered, his hand on his rifle. "Let them," Naylin said, her voice like ice. They watched as 2 men, carrying torches and a can of oil, crept toward the barn. Toward them. "He is not a fool," Naylin whispered, her voice tight with hate. "He knows we need the horses. He burns our escape." "No," Luke said, his voice a low growl. He raised his rifle. He was a good shot. But the men were running, shielded by the other gunmen. Stowe's voice boomed across the yard, cold and confident. "Travers, I know you're in there. Send out my property, and I will let you live. I will even pay you for your trouble. $100 for the woman." "She ain't property," Luke roared back, his voice echoing in the dawn. "Fine," Stowe yelled. He waved his hand. "Burn the barn. If they are in the house, this will catch it next. Smoke them out." The 2 men with the torches ran the last few yards. One splashed the oil on the dry wooden walls. The other touched the torch to it. The wall ignited with a whoosh, the dry wood catching instantly. The mare screamed in terror from the stall below. A red, murderous rage, hotter than the flames, ripped through Luke. He fired. The man with the torch stumbled, grabbing his leg, but did not fall. Gunfire exploded from all sides, bullets thudding into the barn walls. "We have to get out," Luke yelled over the roar of the fire and the screaming of the horses. "The house! It's our only chance!" He grabbed Naylin's hand. "Keep low." He half threw her from the hayloft door, landing hard on the ground below, his ribs screaming in protest. They ran low to the ground, the yard lit by the growing fire. Smoke was everywhere. A bullet kicked up dirt by Naylin's feet. She did not slow. They reached the cabin door. Luke tore at the barricade, ripping the boards away, and shoved her inside. He dove in after her, just as a volley of shots shattered the wood where he had been standing. The cabin was a fortress, but the yard was a killing field. The barn was now a raging inferno, the heat baking the side of the house. The screaming of the horses was a terrible, agonizing sound that cut through the gunfire. "He killed them," Luke said, his voice hollow, his face illuminated by the fire. "He killed them. He will kill us too, if you do not fight," Naylin said, her voice sharp. She grabbed the shotgun and moved to the back window slot. Luke took the front. The smoke from the barn gave them cover. Stowe's men were shadows in the haze, firing at the cabin. A bullet splintered the wood near Luke's head. He fired back, saw a man jump back. "They're going to rush the door," Luke yelled. He saw a man, larger than the others, break from the smoke, an axe in his hand. He was charging the door. Luke aimed, his hand steady, but the lingering pain from his ribs made him pull the shot. The bullet struck the man's arm. He yelled, dropping the axe, and fired his pistol wildly at the window. Luke felt it before he heard it, a white-hot spike of pain. It was not his ribs. It was his shoulder. The bullet had torn through the pine barricade, spraying splinters, lead, and wood into his upper arm. He cried out, a sharp, involuntary gasp, and fell back, the rifle clattering to the floor. He was hit badly. Nolan heard him. She left her post, her face a mask of terror. "Luke!" She saw the blood, dark and spreading, soaking his shirt. He was slumped against the wall, trying to pick up the rifle with his left hand, his face pale with shock. "The door!" he gasped. "The door!" Outside, the man with the axe, his arm bleeding, had recovered. He was charging again, his face a mask of rage. He was 10 feet from the door. Nayland did not hesitate. There was no time for fear. She was a hunter. She snatched the heavy rifle, her movements fluid and certain. She stepped over Luke's legs, braced the stock against the wall, and aimed through the firing slot. She breathed out, steady. She had shot coyotes. She had shot rabbits. This was no different. It was a threat. She fired. The roar of the 45-70 filled the small cabin. Outside, the man with the axe stopped. He looked down at his chest, where a new, dark hole had appeared. He dropped the axe and fell face first into the dirt, not moving. The yard went silent. The only sound was the roar and crackle of the burning barn. The shooting had stopped. From the smoke, Stowe's voice yelled, "Elias, Cole!" One of his men shouted back, "Cole's down, boss! She shot him, clean through!" There was a long pause. Then Stowe's voice, tight with fury and a new, grudging fear. "She is not worth this! Grab Elias, we're leaving!" Luke heard the sound of men retreating, of horses galloping away. They were gone. It was over. Nayland dropped the rifle. She was shaking, her body finally succumbing to the terror she had held back. She turned to Luke. He was slumped against the wall, his eyes closed, his face the color of ash. "Luke," she whispered, tearing a strip from her skirt. "Stay with me." She pressed the cloth hard against his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. He opened his eyes, his gaze finding hers. You did it, Nayland. You saved us." The sound of more horses made her blood run cold. They were coming back. She grabbed the rifle again, her knuckles white. But this was not gunfire. It was the disorganized, loud approach of the townsfolk, drawn by the smoke and the volley of shots. Blevins and 4 other men, including Mr. Abernathy from the store, rode into the yard. They stopped, their horses shying from the heat of the burning barn, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. They saw the dead man in the yard. They saw the smoldering ruins of the barn. And then they saw the cabin door open. Luke staggered out, his left arm holding Nayland, who was supporting him. His right arm was covered in blood, a crude bandage wrapped around his shoulder. Nayland's face was smudged with gunpowder, and she held the rifle, its barrel still warm. Blevin's jaw dropped. "My God, Travers, what happened? Who is that Cole?" He recognized the dead man. "A known hired gun from Tucson." "Stowe," Luke bit out, the pain making his voice thin. "He came for her. We fought." Blevins looked from Luke to Nolan, to the dead man. The pieces clicked in his head, forming an ugly, simple picture. You killed him? You killed a white man? For her?" The murmuring started. "He's been harboring her all this time. An Indian lover. He's turned against his own kind. Abernathy, you sold him those bullets." Luke had faced down 9 hired guns. He was not afraid of these whispering cowards. He pushed himself away from Nolan, standing on his own, his body rigid with pain and a cold, clear fury. He looked at Blevins, at Abernathy, at all their judgmental, fearful faces. "This woman," he said, his voice quiet, but it cut through their whispers like a knife. "This woman found me when I was half dead. She tended my wounds. She hunted for me when I could not. She just saved my life from men you were too cowardly to face." He took a step toward them, his eyes burning. "She's more decent than any of you have ever been to me." The silence that followed was total. No one met his gaze. Blevins, his face red, looked at the ground. Abernathy just looked sad. Luke had drawn a line in the dust of his yard, and he had put them all on the other side of it. Without another word, he turned his back on them. He walked, with Nayland's help, back into the cabin and shut the door. That night, they did not sleep in the house. The smell of gunpowder was too strong, the air too thick with the ghosts of the morning. The barn was a smoking, glowing pile of embers. The horses were gone. His past, his livelihood. It was all ash. Luke's shoulder had been cleaned and tightly bound. The bullet had gone clean through. A mercy. But he was weak, and the loss of his animals, his barn, it was a final, devastating blow. They took their bedrolls and lay under the stars, near the one standing wall of the old corral. The night air was cold, but the ground was still warm from the fire. Nayland lay beside him, her head resting on his uninjured side, her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They stared up at the vast, uncaring spray of stars. "They will come back," Nayland whispered into the darkness. "Stowe, or the town, Blevins, they will not let us be. We are—" An insult to them. Now. Luke knew she was right. He had made his choice. He had defended her, and in doing so, he had excommunicated himself. This land, his father's land, was no longer his. "We have to leave," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The ranch is finished. The land is burned." He felt her nod against his chest. "Where?" she asked. "Where is there for us?" He looked up at the Milky Way. A river of light in the blackness. He thought of her story, of a little girl, taken, of a mother who could not look for her. "South," he said, his voice finding a new, hard resolve. "We will go south, away from Saguaro Creek, away from Stowe." He paused, then said, "And then we will find Ayanna. We will find your daughter." He felt her hand tighten on his shirt. She said nothing. She just held on, as they lay under the stars. Two survivors, with nothing left but ash, and each other. They left the ranch 2 weeks later, just as Luke's shoulder was healing from a ragged, puckered wound to a tight, angry scar. There was nothing left for them there. The barn was a heap of blackened timbers and ash. The smell of burned horseflesh, a uniquely sickening odor, lingered in the air, a constant reminder of Stowe's brutality. The house was intact, but it was no longer a home. It was a fortress that had been breached, a place of ghosts and gunfire. The town of Saguaro Creek and the entire territory had become enemy land. Luke had a small cache of money, coins saved from a cattle sale 2 years prior, hidden under the hearthstone. It was not much, just over $100, but it was enough. They packed what little they had, 2 bedrolls, the shotgun, the rifle, a bag of salt, the last of the coffee, and the clothes on their backs. Nayland carried the knife she had taken from Stowe, tucked into her belt. They walked away from the ranch at dusk, 2 small figures heading east, never once looking back. They walked for 3 nights, traveling under the moon, hiding during the heat of the day. The land was open, and they were exposed. Luke's shoulder ached, and his ribs, though healed, still gave him a sharp pain if he moved too quickly. On the 4th day, they reached a different town, a small, dusty crossroads miles south of the Saguaro Creek territory. Luke left Nayland in a dry arroyo half a mile out and went in alone. He returned 3 hours later, leading 2 raw-boned, sway-backed horses that looked like they had been ridden hard and fed little. They were cheap, but they were legs. He had also bought a pack mule and enough flour, beans, and ammunition to last them a month. Their journey truly began then. They rode east, toward the old mission territories on the border, the places the army and the government had used to relocate, re-educate, or simply hide the children taken in the raids. It was a land of sparse water and relentless sun, and they were a sight that invited trouble. A scarred white man, his arms still stiff, traveling with an Apache woman. Every campfire, every river crossing, every distant rider was a potential threat. They faced suspicion at every turn. At a trading post on the Gila River, the proprietor's eyes had narrowed, his hand moving to the shotgun he kept under the counter. Luke had done the talking, his voice flat, asking for grain for the horses, his body positioned between the man and Nayland, who stood by the door, her hand on her knife. They paid double the asking price and were glad to leave. They faced hunger. They did not dare light a fire big enough to cook game, even if they had time to hunt. Their diet was cold beans, cold flour mixed with water, and whatever Nalin could find. She would slip away from their cold camps at dusk, returning with a handful of cactus fruit, or a snare of wild onions, or, on one lucky night, 2 rabbits she had trapped with wire and skill. They ate them raw, sharing the meat in the darkness, their intimacy a desperate, silent thing. They faced outlaws. One afternoon, as they were resting the horses in a deep, shaded canyon, 2 men rode up on them. They were deserters, by the look of their torn blue trousers, and they had the dead-eyed, hollow look of men who had seen too much and cared for too little. "Well, now," the taller one said, his eyes on Nalin. "What have we here? That's a fine-looking woman you got there. Friend." Luke was on his feet, his rifle in his hand, but held loosely, not yet a threat. "Keep riding," he said, his voice low. "I don't think we will," the second man said, grinning, showing black, rotted teeth. "We're just looking for a little company, and maybe those horses." Luke did not raise his rifle. Nalin, who had been checking the mule's pack, stepped around. She was holding Luke's shotgun, and she was not holding it loosely. Both barrels were cocked, aimed squarely at the taller man's chest. The men froze. They had seen a white man and an Indian woman and assumed weakness. They had not seen 2 warriors, partners, who had already fought for their lives. The deserters were used to preying on the weak. They looked at Nalin's cold, steady eyes, at the twin black holes of the shotgun, and at Luke, who was now slowly raising his rifle. They were outnumbered. "Easy, friend," the tall one said, raising his hands. Just passing through." They backed their horses up, turned, and rode away, much faster than they had arrived. Luke let out a long, slow breath. He looked at Nalin. She uncocked the hammers and lowered the shotgun. "They were weak," she said simply. "Like the coyotes. All noise." He nodded. "You were good. We were good," she corrected him. They rode on, side by side, the shared danger, the silent companionship, the wordless understanding of who would watch and who would sleep. It forged them into something new. They were no longer 2 broken pieces. They were a single, solid thing, hardened by the trail, by fire, and by blood. After 6 weeks of riding, they crossed into the New Mexico territory. The land changed. It grew greener, softer. There were streams, and the red rock gave way to low, pinon-covered hills. One evening, they crested a rise and saw it in the valley below. A mission. It was old, the adobe walls crumbling in places, the white paint peeling. A small, simple bell tower stood against the purple sky. It was the mission of San Esteban, a place known, and sometimes feared, for taking in the orphans of the wars. Luke felt Nalin's hand on his arm. She was trembling, not from cold or fear, but from a terrible, agonizing hope. They camped that night within sight of the mission. Neither of them slept. They rode down in the morning. A few old men were working in a dusty cornfield. A woman in a dark habit was hanging laundry on a line. As they approached, she turned. She was old, her face a web of deep wrinkles, her eyes dark and intelligent. Luke dismounted, his hat in his hand. "Ma'am," he said. "Senor," she replied, her voice accented. She looked at Nalin, who remained on her horse, a silent, rigid statue. The nun's gaze was not unkind, but it was wary. She had seen 1,000 desperate stories ride into this yard. We are looking for someone," Luke said, his throat dry. "A child, from the Chiricahua raid, north of here. It would have been 7 years ago." The nun's face, which had been open, closed. "That was a long time ago. Senor, the war, it took so many. The records are not complete. Many children died of fever." "We know," Luke said, his voice thick with the desperation he felt from Nalin. "But this girl, she was She was taken. She might have been brought here." "Many were brought here," the nun said, her voice gentle but firm. "They were baptized. They were given new names. They were placed with good, God-fearing families. They have new lives. It is better to let the past sleep. We cannot," Luke said. He looked back at Nolin, and his heart broke for her. She had not moved, but he could see the hope dying in her eyes, her hand tightening on the reins. Nayland slid off her horse. She walked forward, her worn boots silent in the dust. She stood in front of the nun. She did not speak. She just looked at her face a raw, open plea. She was a mother. The nun was a woman. In that silent gaze, 1,000 words were exchanged. The nun's stern, practical facade softened. She looked at Nolin, truly saw her, and her eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. She had seen this grief before. I am Sister Teresa," she said, her voice dropping. "I have been here for 30 years. I do not remember all the names. There were so many." "Her name was Ayana," Nayland whispered, the first words she had spoken. Sister Teresa's eyes widened slightly. The name, it was not a Spanish or an English name. It was a memory. "Ayana," she repeated, tasting the sound. She looked at Nolin. I remember a girl. She came in with a group from the north. She was so small, maybe 3 or 4. She was wild. She would not speak. She bit one of the sisters." A small, sad smile touched the nun's lips. "She had dark eyes, fierce eyes, like yours." Nayland's hand flew to her mouth. A sob held back. "She had a blanket," Sister Teresa continued, her mind moving back through the years. "Just a piece of one, a scrap. She held it. She would not let it go. We had to cut it from her hand when she slept. It had something beaded on it." "Ayana," Nayland breathed. "It was her name. I beaded it for her." Sister Teresa nodded slowly, her old eyes shining. "Yes, that was the one. She was here for almost a year. We called her Anna. She learned to speak a little English, a little Spanish. She was so smart." "Where is she?" Luke asked, moving to Nolin's side, his hand on her back. "Is she alive?" "Yes," the nun said. "She is alive. She was a favorite, a good family, a kind family. They adopted her. They have a homestead, east of here, 2 days' ride. Their name is Miller, John and Sarah Miller. They could not have children of their own. They loved her. They were so good to her." Nayland was swaying. Luke caught her, holding her up. The nun crossed herself. "Go with God, my children, but be gentle. She will not remember you." They rode for 2 days, a blur of silent, agonizing anticipation. They did not talk. There was nothing to say. Luke's mind was full of 1,000 worries. What if the Millers were cruel? What if the girl was unhappy? What if, as the nun said, she did not remember? Nayland's face was a mask, her eyes fixed on the eastern horizon, as if she could pull the destination closer by sheer will. They found the homestead on the 3rd morning. It was in a small, green valley, by a stream lined with cottonwood trees. It was a small, neat cabin, with a good fence and a large, thriving garden. A dog barked as they approached. They did not ride in. They stopped on the low ridge overlooking the farm, and they saw her. A girl, of about 10 years, was outside, feeding chickens from a bucket. She had long, dark hair, tied back in a single braid, just as Nolin wore hers. She was wearing a simple calico dress. She moved with a quick, confident energy. When the dog barked, she looked up, shielding her eyes. Nayland made a sound, a low, strangled gasp. It was her. It was Ayana. She was tall. She was healthy. She looked happy. She looked whole. Nayland slid from her horse, her legs weak. She sank to the ground, her gaze locked on the girl, who, unaware of her audience, threw the last of the feed to the chickens and ran back toward the house. Nalen's heart was being torn in two. It was a joy so profound it was a physical agony, followed by a grief just as deep. The nun was right. That happy, confident girl in the calico dress would not know the wild, grieving woman who was watching her from the ridge. To go down there, to claim her, it would be to destroy the peace she had so clearly found. Nalen began to weep, silent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She had found her, and she had lost her, all over again. Luke dismounted and knelt beside her. He did not touch her, he just waited. He watched the small cabin, saw a woman, Sarah Miller, come to the door and hug the girl as she went inside. It was a home. He put his hand on Nalen's shoulder. She leaned into him, her grief too heavy to bear alone. "We can go," he said softly, his voice thick. "We can ride away. You've seen her. You know she is safe. You know she lived." Nalen shook her head, her face buried in her hands. I cannot." Luke's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Then we go down. We don't have to take her. She has a life. Nalen, a good one. But she'll know you lived. She'll know you came back for her." Nalen looked up, her face streaked with dirt and tears. He was right. It was not about taking. It was about knowing. She stood up, her body trembling, but her spine stiff. She wiped her face and nodded. They rode down, the dog barking furiously. The cabin door opened. Sarah Miller, a woman with kind eyes and hair the color of straw, stepped out, a shotgun in her hands. Her husband, John, a tall, broad-shouldered man, came out behind her. The girl, Ayanna, peeked out from behind her mother's skirt, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. "That's far enough," Sarah called out, her voice steady, though she was clearly afraid. Luke dismounted, his hands raised, palms open. "We mean no harm, ma'am. My name is Luke Travers. This is my wife, Nalen. We spoke to Sister Teresa at the mission." Sarah Miller's face went pale. Her grip on the shotgun faltered. She knew, she had known, every day for 7 years, that this day might come. John Miller stepped forward, his face grim. "What do you want?" I am her mother," Nalen said, her voice a raw whisper. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the little girl, who was staring at her with a strange, intense curiosity. "Her name is Annie," Sarah said, her voice shaking, protective. "We call her Annie." "Her name," Nalen said, her voice stronger, "is Ayanna." The girl, Annie, tilted her head, as if hearing a familiar, long-forgotten sound. Nalen was trembling. She did not know what to do. How could she prove it? She looked at the girl, this beautiful stranger who was her flesh and blood, and from a place deeper than memory, a sound arose. Nalen closed her eyes. She began to sing. It was a simple, 3-note lullaby, a song her own mother had sung to her, a song about the wind in the pines and the safety of the awa. It was the song she had been singing in the cave. Just before the soldier had ripped Ayanna from her arms, the girl froze. Her eyes went wide. Her face, which had been curious, was now filled with a dawning, shocked recognition. It was a sound from her deepest, most buried dreams. She stepped out from behind Sarah Miller. "That song," the girl whispered, her voice a tiny thread. I know that song." Nalen opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She held out her arms. The girl looked at Sarah, her adoptive mother, who was now weeping, her hand over her mouth. Sarah nodded, giving her a gentle push. "It's all right, Annie, it's all right." The girl turned. She looked at Nalen, and she ran. She did not walk. She did not hesitate. She flew across the yard and crashed into Nalen's arms, her small body fitting perfectly against the one that had borne her. Nalen collapsed to her knees, her arms locked around her daughter, rocking her, singing the lullaby through her sobs. "Ayanna, my Ayanna." The girl did not speak. She just clung to her face buried in Nalen's neck, her hands clutching her hair. No words were needed. It was not a memory. It was recognition. It was blood calling to blood. Luke stood back, his hat in his hand, his own eyes blurred. John and Sarah Miller stood on their porch, weeping for the child they had loved, and for the mother who had come back from the dead. That night, they all sat at the Millers' table. It was a hard, painful, beautiful conversation. Naylin told her story. The Millers told theirs. They had found Annie at the mission, a wild, silent child, and they had loved her. Naylin knew she could not take her, Ayanna. Annie, she had a home, she had parents, but Nalin could not leave either. It was Luke who offered the solution. "You have land," he said to John Miller, who nodded. I am a builder. I can work. Let us stay. Let us build a cabin nearby, by the stream. She does not need to lose one mother to gain another." John Miller looked at his wife, at the two of them, and at his daughter, who was sitting on the floor by Nalin's feet, her head resting on her mother's knee, already asleep. He nodded. "You can stay," he said, his voice thick. "There is land, and there is work." Luke built them a cabin. It took a month. He worked with John Miller. His strength returned. His shoulder healed. He was not building a ranch. He was not building a fortress. He was building a home. It was small, just one room, but it was sturdy, and it was near the stream. The story ends not with a final, hard stop, but with a quiet afternoon. The sound of wind moved through the cottonwood trees, their leaves a high, whispering rustle. Luke sat on the bank of the stream, his back against a large, warm rock. His arm was around Nalin, her head resting on his shoulder. In her lap, her daughter, Ayanna, lay fast asleep, her face peaceful, her hand clutching a fold of her mother's dress. In a harsh world that took everything, they had found each other. They had built something, quiet, small, and real. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this. And please, share your thoughts in English.